Hello everybody, Chanchal Bose here. It's my great privilege to walk you through a session of preparing your system for installing Linux. When you start installing Linux, the greatest hurdle is partitioning hard disk. In this session, we are going to cover basic partitioning and also partitioning scheme from an advanced user's perspective. Now, this screen shows the usual partitioning scheme on any Windows user's desktop or laptop. In the first case, the user has distributed or divided his entire hard disk in 4 primary partitions: C, D, E and F. In the second case, the hard disk has been divided into 2 parts: primary partitions and extended partitions. C colon is the primary partition, D colon, E colon, F colon, all are logical partitions in extended partitions or within extended partition. In the third case, this is the worst case scenario. You have bought your laptop and it has a pre-installed Windows operating system and it has a partitioning scheme. It could be something like this. There is a first primary partition which is in red, and this partition stores some of Windows boot record, etc., and the last one is the recovery scheme. We'll address each of this partitioning scheme and whatever be the kind of partitioning scheme, how you can install Linux onto these kind of systems. This is the first screen, that is the partitioning scheme with only Windows operating system and 4 primary partition. Here your choice is very easy. For installing Linux, you need only 2 partitions, one swap partition and another / partition. So what you do, usually we will delete this F partition. Whatever data that is there in this F partition, before deleting it, we are going to copy it to E drive or D drive or C drive. Thereafter delete this F partition and create an extended partition out of it, and within that extended partition we are going to create 2 partitions, one swap and one /. Now, why creation of an extended partition? The reason being, you can have only 4 partitions in one hard disk unless you have UEFI partitioning scheme and GUI partitioning scheme installed. Since that part is not covered in this particular session, so we are not going into that. So if this is your partitioning scheme, to overcome the limitation of 4 primary partition scheme, we have to create one extended partition. So we have created one extended partition here and divided it into a swap partition and a / partition at the time of installation. How we will do it, that I am going to cover in my next part. Now this is the second case. Here the user's partitions is divided in 2 parts: primary partition and extended partition. Within extended partition there are 3 logical drives. So for installing Linux, we again are going to delete this F partition and create a swap partition and a / partition at the time of installation. In the third case, this is the worst case scenario. The system is a laptop or it could be a desktop. It has come with a pre-installed Windows operating system. Hardware provider has created a special partition, one recovery partitions. In this type of scenario, usually it is very difficult to repartition the entire hard disk without data loss. So you may well have to repartition the entire hard disk after backing up all your data in some other hard drive or removable device or in a network device or something like that. So in this case, you will have a tough time. Finally, we come to the disk partitioning scheme for advanced users. Here is a test case scenario. My hard disk is of 500 GB. The first partitions, C drive, I have allocated 75 GB NTFS file system for installing Windows. It could be something different. It could be, the size could be something different in your case. Possibly you are going to allocate 100 GB or 150 GB. It's your preference. Then I have created one more partition, primary partition of 20 GB. Now why I have created this partition? As you become an expert in Linux, you may well feel like experimenting with Unix operating systems like Solaris, FreeBSD and NetBSD. Now these operating systems gets installed only on a primary partition. So if you have a primary partition well in advance, you can experiment with them. Even if you don't experiment, you can keep the partition formatted in NTFS file system, so that even if you don't install those operating systems, you can use the space as an NTFS file system. Then this blue partition, this is the swap partition. This one single swap partition will be used by all Linux distribution that you may well install at any point of time. Ideally, the size could be 4 GB or more. This red partition, this is an ext4 file system. Its size is large. Here I am going to install that particular Linux distribution which I am going to use most of the time. In my case, it's mostly Linux. In your case, it could be something different. It's all your choice and preference. Then I have kept one more partition of 50 GB for installing Debian or Ubuntu. One more partition of 30 GB. This is for Kali Linux or Backtrack. Kali Linux is usually used by people experimenting with hacking or ethical hacking. There is a green partition. This partition I have kept aside for experimenting with other Linux distributions like Linux Mint, OpenSUSE and Fedora, and rest of the disk space allocated in two different NTFS file systems. The reason being, NTFS file system is supported by most of the Linux distribution as well as Windows operating system. Planning the disk's partitioning scheme well in advance makes sense, as it could save a lot of trouble for you. Once you have partitioned the scheme in a planned fashion for installing multiple operating systems, it won't be necessary for you to repartition the hard disk at any point of time in future. Most often you are going to install the operating system on its own partition. For example, if you want to experiment with the latest variant of Ubuntu, you can reinstall the Ubuntu on its own partition, or for that matter any other Linux variant. Since repartitioning is not involved, so the chance of data loss is not likely. In previous section I have demonstrated what should be the ideal partitioning scheme for an advanced user. Now in this section I'm going to show you how you can do the same partitioning scheme or implement that partitioning scheme using MostlyLinux's live DVD. It can be downloaded from mostlylinux.com. I am using that same live CD or DVD, and using that I'm going to create that partitioning scheme. Now MostlyLinux live DVD comes with gparted partition editor. You can open it the way I have just demonstrated, and here it's opening up. Now this is my partitioning scheme. There are 4 primary partitions. For installing Linux, you need to delete one of the partitions. I am deleting the last partition. As I said, for installing Linux, you need only 2 partitions. One swap partition, another slash partition. I am creating a swap partition first. Its size should be around 4 GB. It could be larger. For most desktop purposes, 4 GB is sufficient. Now from the drop down menu, I make the choice Linux swap and add. Now I have created the swap partition. Now I'll create a new partition. Now the moment I try to do it, you cannot create more than 4 primary partitions on a traditional disk partitioning scheme. So whatever we have done till now, I am undoing it. So in fact, we need to create an extended partition to overcome the limits of 4 primary partitions. Now we create a new partition. From this drop down menu, I choose extended partition and put the entire extended partition to the empty space. Next I click new, type 4096, which is 4 GB. This single swap partition will be used by, or can be used by, all Linux operating systems that you install onto these systems. I am making an ext4 partitions of the entire free space. Now if you are planning to install only one Linux distribution, then it's good. But as I said, for an advanced user, this partitioning scheme is not ideal. So the way I demonstrated in my presentation, I would like to show how you can achieve that partitioning scheme. So we are going to delete all the partitions excluding the first one where Windows operating system is installed. So one by one I have deleted all the partitions. Next I have created a new partition and I am making its size only roughly around 20 GB and making it NTFS partition. As I said, the purpose of this partition would be to install FreeBSD or for that matter OpenBSD, Oracle, Solaris, such partitions, such operating systems. So if you plan to install these operating systems, you can have this 20 GB primary partition NTFS. Why I am making it NTFS? Because you are not installing that today itself. Next I am creating a new extended partition. So within this extended partition I am going to create a small 4 GB partition for swap. This is the swap partition, and from the drop down I choose Linux swap, add. Now it's made. Next I am going to create that partition for the Linux which I am going to use most frequently, and to that I am going to allocate as much space as possible. So I am giving it roughly around 49 GB or so and making it extended partition. And now I am creating one more partition. Here I plan to install my secondary Linux operating systems, which could be in your case Ubuntu, Red Hat or whatever it is CentOS. So I am allotting another 20 GB to it, and this is for my second Linux distribution. Third one for Kali Linux or hacking Linux, backtrack, etc. To that I am allocating around another 20 GB. ext4, add. Now that's done, and I am creating one more partition for all Linux, new Linux distributions like Linux Mint, OpenSUSE, Fedora, etc. I am allocating 50 GB for that. Click add. Now rest of this space I want to divide it into two partitions. NTFS. Why NTFS? Because NTFS is supported by most of the Linux distribution as well as by Windows. So here is the first NTFS partition, and next I create another NTFS partition where I am going to create all my data, etc. Now once you have done it, click apply and it's done. So it's that simple, that easy. With gparted partition editor you can do the entire partitioning using this graphic user interface. It's a great tool. You can always download it from sourceforge.net, gparted project, and you can achieve this as simply as I am doing it right now here. Thank you for watching this video. Please let me know the kind of video you would like to see here. I'll try to make that available. Thank you again.